Good morning, Carl.
Good morning, thank you.
Tell us why out then?
There's a number of reasons. I think, first of all, if I can explain, I'm from Business for Britain, which is behind the Vote for Leave campaign and supporting it. And the reason we wanted to get involved is because if you listen to what people are saying out in the wider environment, you get the impression that a lot of businesses are in favour of staying in the EU. And in fact, as you've already explained, a lot of businesses don't think that. A lot of businesses think it is good to get out of the EU for a number of reasons. And your listeners just talked about a few of those. First of all, the cost. They were absolutely right. We pay £350 million a week into the EU. And yes, we have the benefit of some trade with the EU, but the sheer cost of doing business with regulations imposed by the EU is quite substantial. But more than that, one of your other listeners referred to the fact that we don't have a real say. And if you look at the EU, it is a pretty undemocratic organisation. It's pretty unrepresentative. And a lot of the businesses backing this campaign believe that if you're going to have between 50 and 60% of your laws passed that affect business by Brussels, that's wrong. If you've got laws being passed that affect UK businesses, affect UK people, that should really be done by UK politicians who are accountable to us and who are representing us.
Do we get more back than we give in, though? That's one of the arguments that's always brought up, isn't it?
No, we don't. I mean, we do get some back. That is true. But if you look at the £350 million a week we spend in, we get a fraction of that back. But more importantly, when it does come back, we really have no say in where that goes. That spending is something which is organised by, led by the EU. It's money that comes from UK taxpayers, goes into the EU, but we have no real say on how it's directed thereafter.
It's easy with decisions like this to think about what's going on at the moment, but are we looking ahead enough in terms of what benefits we might get if we were to sail through the arguably harder times now for the benefits that we might get from staying in the EU in years to come?
Well, I think one of the things, if you look at the way in which voters are thinking about the EU at the moment, quite a few of your voters there were against the EU. Probably we would estimate it's probably about a third want to stay passionately in the EU, a third passionately want to leave, and there's a third who are worried about which way do I vote? What happens if I stay in? What happens if I leave? And of course, most people don't like change. That's natural. So there's a tendency for people to say, well, if we stay in, things will get better. The one thing I would say, if you vote to stay in the EU, you are not voting for things to stay the same. It will change dramatically over the next few years. If you look back over recent times, you've already seen the EU move towards federalism within the organisation, and European politicians are a lot more open about that move towards federalism than UK politicians have been in the past. So if you stay in the EU as the UK, you'll see one of two things happen. I think, firstly, either we'd have to move towards joining the euro, becoming part of a federal organisation, so Britain effectively may become a region of the EU, or we become a part player on the side with no real influence. And believe me, we already have very little influence at the moment. We have 13% of the population of the EU and about 9% of the votes in the Parliament.
But the in-campaign, business-wise, the in-campaign would have us believe that if we leave the Union, we are in some way putting up barriers with the countries that Britain trades with most.
No, that's not right at all, we think. The fact is that there are countries outside of the EU. I mean, Peru and Chile have trade agreements with the EU. Germany sells £62 billion worth of goods and services to the UK every year. A deficit from the UK point of view, about £30 billion. There is going to be a good trade agreement with the EU. They are not going to stop trading with the UK. We are too big a partner. One of your, we're the second largest contributor to the EU at the moment, but more importantly, we're Germany's largest export market. We're France's key export market. More than that, though, it opens up the opportunity for us to do trade agreements with the rest of the world. I mean, the EU tries to negotiate trade agreements with the likes of China, Brazil, the US. They have to corral together the interests of 28 different countries with markedly different interests. The UK could go out on its own and negotiate trade agreements with these countries. And so many of your listeners referred to that, China, Asia, growing markets. And the EU is unusual as a trading bloc. It's probably the only trading bloc whose share of global gross domestic product, GDP, is actually falling. And our exports to the EU, although they're still probably quite sizable at about 45% of our total exports, are actually trending downwards.
Just,
sorry.
Well, just finally and very briefly, do you think that the general public know enough? Are they well equipped enough in terms of knowledge and information to be able to vote on something like this? The people we spoke to earlier on, that our reporter Amanda spoke to, were more knowledgeable than anybody I've ever heard talking about it. But what do you think in general?
Well, I think the debate is now really starting, and I think if you went back a few months, people were not paying the same sort of attention as they are now. And I think over the next 5 to 6 months, or whenever the referendum is actually held, I think you'll see a number of things happening. Groups like Business for Britain and Vote Leave getting the message out. People will become better informed. It is a complex situation. It's a complex position, but I think people are learning more and more about it and getting more and more interested as the date of the referendum now draws closer.
Thank you very much. Carl Chambers from a Yorkshire and Humber business group who want to leave.
You didn't frankly have the balls to put country before party.